Welcome. I'm Rabbi Ed Elkin. I'm the rabbi of the First Narayever congregation. Really thrilled to be able to welcome you all to our newly renovated and newly accessible synagogue. And this is actually our first public community program. Since we reopened, we moved out in March of 2020, coincidentally just as COVID hit, for the renovation, and we've been meeting elsewhere while the renovation's been taking place. We were proudly hosted NIF programs before, and I'm really thrilled that our first community program, now that we're back, is with the New Israel Fund. So I would just like at this time to acknowledge that we're on territory that was a traditional gathering place for many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And we pray that our government and leaders and all of us in the community will pursue meaningful reconciliation with the indigenous peoples of this land in good faith and with open hearts. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Mark. Okay. Mark, bevakasha.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Finkelstein. And I'm holding up the mic to my mouth. And I'm a new board member of the New Israel Fund of Canada. I want to thank everyone for joining us today to learn more about what's happening in Israel today, how we got here, and what we can do about it. We are very, very appreciative to be hosted in this beautiful new building at the First Narayever, and to the Canadian Friends of Peace Now and Remain in Canada who have helped co-sponsor this program. I think many of you are here today because of what brought me here, a very deep connection to Israeli society that is matched by my commitment to liberal and progressive values. The same things I wish for Canada, I also wish for Israel: prosperity, safety, equal rights for all citizens, freedom to marry the person you love, protections for the most marginalized and vulnerable, and an economy that leaves no one behind. Right now, as you all know, that vision appears under threat in Israel. A new extreme government is in power, composed of parties that are attempting to make radical makeovers of law and society. What is happening? Is democracy really under threat? How did this situation arise? What is being done by Israelis in response? What can we do from here? These questions are not new to the New Israel Fund. For 40 years, the New Israel Fund has been funding Israeli societal change activists and supporting the growth of grassroots organizations that have fought and won Israel's struggles for a better, fairer, more equal country. Haaretz put it best, and I'll quote, "There is hardly any significant socially oriented organization in Israel today that does not owe its existence to the New Israel Fund." We are here in Toronto on a cross-country emergency tour because it's critically important for Israelis fighting for democracy and equality that they receive diaspora support. But it is also critically important for us as diaspora Jews to understand that this is a long-term struggle for the soul of Israeli society. And it is forcing us to reshape how we see Israel and how we engage with it and how we support it. To lead this conversation tonight, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers, Ben Moraine and Lihi Shmuely. Lihi Shmuely will be, she'll be on screen there. They'll share their analyses of the present situation, and afterwards we'll take questions. Please, everybody, feel free to stay for light refreshments afterwards. I'll start with Ben. First off, it was Ben's birthday yesterday. And now he's officially an old man.
40.
You're 80.
Ben Moraine is the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund of Canada and a leading voice of millennial engagement with Israel. For over 15 years, Ben has led at the intersection of Jewish life, social justice, and Israel. He previously worked for New Israel Fund's US branch, won Jewish Innovation Awards for his work in environmentalism and campus life, and founded both online and offline Jewish communities. In 2012, he received the prestigious Dorot Leadership Fellowship in Israel, where he studied comparative nationalism and consulted for social action groups. He lives in Toronto with his wife and 2 young children. Lihi Shmuely is the Deputy Director of Israel Hofsheet, advocating for policy change on issues of religion and state in Israel. She's been working in the organization for the past 3 years and previously was the Director of Training and Community. Before joining Israel Hofsheet, Lihi led the international programs in developing communities at Ajik Nesped. She was also a coordinator for Partnership Together Leadership Program as part of Montreal Be'er Partnership in the Jewish Agency, and was a community emissary in the Jewish Federation of Columbus, Ohio. Lihi holds a master's in public policy and a BA in political science from Ben Gurion University, as well as a certificate in international development and humanitarian aid from IDC Herzliya. Lihi lives in Tel Aviv and is proudly married to Noah. I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to lead the discussion. There we go.
Thank you very much, Mark. Mark, a newest addition to our board of directors. Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Rabbi Ed, and those of you who are congregants of Narayever for hosting us here. This is actually my first time within your halls, even though obviously we have a great deal of history together. When we planned this program, when we launched this emergency tour a month ago, I think we imagined that we were doing a tour in order to explain how bad things were gonna get. I don't think we really have to do that deep of explaining anymore. We couldn't have anticipated 100,000 people every weekend, 300,000 people yesterday across Israel demonstrating. We couldn't have anticipated that the economists and the bankers and the judges and the bar association and the heads of the universities and parents and teachers and we couldn't have anticipated that so many sectors of Israeli society would be penning important letters and adding their names, or the weighty institutions from the press council to the banks saying that what this government plans is a terrible idea, it's bad for Israeli democracy, and it will lead to incredible consequences. We couldn't have anticipated that here in the diaspora, that we would see, here in Canada in particular, it began as 70 retired justices and law professors opining on the importance that any comparison to say Canada's notwithstanding clause is utterly inappropriate, and the other proposals for judicial reform in Israel are also terrible. That letter has grown to 140 signers in the meantime, and it includes 6 retired Supreme Court justices, including Rosalie Abella. We couldn't have anticipated that the Jewish Federations of North America would issue very clear statements against what's going on. That Erwin Kotler would come out and say something. That Abraham Foxman, that many American Jewish organizations as well would be lending their voices. We couldn't have anticipated that Alan Dershowitz, whatever that's worth, would be saying something as well also. I think Lihi and I are here because we want to share with you what is being done to fight it, and what can be done to fight it, and there's short-term things and there's long-term things. But I think our primary message for you this evening is that all is not lost. And that there are things that we can do, you can do here, and there are things that Israelis can do there, and there's things that we can do together that will, let's not overpromise, that will make a difference now, but that will ultimately, indeed, turning Israel around. What we're going to do this evening is Lihi and I will go through some of those short-term and long-term examples of what we're thinking, what we're doing, how Israeli civil society is responding. We'd like to take some questions, and then afterwards, please join us in the basement to continue talking and discussing as well. Just before we dive into the content, to dive into what we want to talk about, allow Lihi and I to just introduce ourselves a little bit. I know a lot of you here, but it's really wonderful to see so many new faces. We're both, Lihi and I describe ourselves as a little bit weird Jews to land in the seats that we're in. I have a very unlikely path and background to sit in the chair that I sit in now. As the executive director of the New Israel Fund of Canada. I'm the product of 2 generations of intermarriage, and I grew up in in Jewish communities where I was usually the only Jewish kid my age for hundreds of miles in every direction. My grandfather fled Poland. He moved to Costa Rica. He married a Catholic Costa Rican woman. He later moved to LA, had my mom. My mom married another Catholic guy, and after a couple generations of conversion and whatnot, here I am. I grew up in places where, like Oklahoma, Colorado, Nebraska, Texas, Oregon, Washington, places in even California where there weren't so many Jews. And so what was Judaism to me? Judaism was my family's Jewish bookcase. How to be a Jew, how to pray as a Jew, how to, the folklore of our people, the ethics, the morals, the behaviors, and the obligations. It's really easy to believe in all that stuff when you've never met another Jew. We sound really ethical. And it wasn't until many, many years later where I was at a very social justice university. Flash forward many years, all my friends are going to do well-meaning social justice work abroad, Africa, South America, India, what have you. And so, in the early 2000s, where would a good Jewish boy go to do good social justice service? So, of course, I was going to go to Israel-Palestine, and I was going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Just a quick picture of what landing on the ground actually looked like for me. When I arrived, I was very soon thereafter in a Bedouin camp in the West Bank, on the edge of East Jerusalem, at the footsteps of the big settlement in the middle, in the West Bank, Ma'ale Adumim. It was a corrugated aluminum shanty town next to a garbage dump. The Bedouin had no power, the Bedouin had no water, the kids had no shoes. And I remember sitting in that, doing well-meaning volunteerism at the time, looking up at Ma'ale Adumim with its red tile roofs and its green lush gardens and its library of peace and its public rec center. And I think that was my first New Israel Fund moment, I think. That was the first moment that I realized, even if we solved, say, the ethnic national conflict in this place, that just the socioeconomic inequality would keep me working on this place for the rest of my life. And I think in that place, it really occurred to me that this was not on the birthright brochures. It was not what the Tel Avivi nightlife that they talked about. Why was it that nobody had told me that this was also a part of Israel? And where were we? Where was diaspora Jewry present in that situation? And those questions have ultimately led me on a quest to find, who's my tribe? From being a little kid in the middle of nowhere, wondering who are other Jews and who's my tribe and who are my people. And I land in Israel, and I'm also still wondering, who are my people? Who's my tribe? And later on, I would realize that those other Israelis and those other diaspora Jews who were volunteering in those places, they were my tribe. And it only was made clear to me later that the New Israel Fund is what interconnected all of those groups and activists. So when I came home, perhaps it's no surprise that I found work at the New Israel Fund and that I have been working for this organization in one capacity or another for 15 years. So I have found my tribe, so to speak. And I think that's part of the weird journey and the weird Jew that I see myself as. And one of the things I love the most about this work is that I get to meet weird Israelis, like Noah. I get to meet Israelis who are also committed to progressive values and to social justice and have put their careers and their lives into making that place better, not just for Jews, but for all people who live there in all kinds of ways, and really tackling the tough questions. And certainly before us today, we're dealing with tough questions. So, Lihi, would you do us the kindness of telling our assembled, gosh, how many people do we have here? 70? 70 people, how, your weirdness, why you think you're strange and unusual for Israelis. So unmute yourself and tell us who you are.
Hi, everyone. I want to say good to be here because I am here in Toronto, but just a few hours ago, we found out that I got a COVID, which is great. Dodged that bullet for 3 years until today. I really appreciate that you came in today, and I honestly very appreciate the fact that you care enough to show up today and be part of our discussion. Thank you also for the flexibility as we wanted to still hold the event and have this important discussion because every minute counts when it comes to what's happening in Israel today. So yeah, as been described, I honestly feel a little bit weird myself. I think if I'll try to best describe who I am, I would take you all to this scene that you would find every Yom Kippur at the Shmuely's house. You would see on one side of the table my mom, who comes from a Mizrahi, Iraqi, traditional, religious, right-wing family. She has like 8 siblings, very like classic and typical. And she's fasting. And on the other side of the table, you have my father, who comes from an Ashkenazi, liberal, secular, Holocaust survivors, left-wing voters, who is eating his ham and cheese sandwich. And so in the middle, you'll have both, like you have me and both of my brothers. And I think it describes the best, in the best way, how I don't think I even realized that till very late in my life, that without even saying much, and despite all the disagreements between my parents, we learned that the freedom to choose who we are, who we want to be, is probably the most important thing for my parents to teach us, and the most important thing for them, the shared value that they wanted us to be educated with. And I think it was about 6 years ago. I came up to my parents and I told them that I'm not so sure what am I, but I think I have a girlfriend. And so, of course, my mother was crying, like mourning. My father went to the kitchen to bring arak to raise a toast. They're that different. And so after hours and hours conversation with my mom, really was crying her soul out. I was trying to reassure her. I was trying to make her calm. And at a certain point, she said, look, I will be fine with it. I will accept it. And it will take me some time, but eventually it will happen. It's just that I'm very scared. I'm scared how would your future look like. It's hard enough to be a woman in this country, so let alone a couple of women. I'm worried about the future of your family. Would you have one? How would your family look like? And would they have equal rights in the country we live in? Would they be tagged as different? And I was really trying to reassure her. Like I told her, I know that you're scared. She was always talking about what a conservative country we live in. And I was trying to tell her, Mom, this is a pretty liberal country. Like, don't worry, we'll be fine. We will have a family. We will be equal. And at the time, I was pretty confident in what I'm telling my mom, trying to reassure her. Honestly, today I'm not as confident. Unfortunately, I am scared for the future of my country, my not existing yet kids. And yeah, I think this is why we're here today. Yeah.
I think it's a great transition to the moment that we're in. Both of those things are true. Israel is a very conservative country, and Israel is a very liberal country. And we are witnessing a great wrestling for the soul of that place. So I don't think that we need to go into great length, and there are excellent resources that we have on our website about the details of the legislative proposals, the particular legislation that's already passed, the bills that they want to pass, the things they have promised in their campaigns to do but have not done yet. Obviously, it feels like a blizzard. It's a very Trumpian moment where the government has come into power and has leapt to action with a very, very bold, we would say radical, re-envisioning of Israeli society and state. I don't think we need to go into explaining all of that, because I think what Lihi and I are best placed to actually talk about is, what does the opposition look like? What are the chances of us winning? What can we fight back on? And what are the odds of ultimately turning the ship around? I think just to give a spoiler alert, to give it away, we wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't believe that Israel had within that. We wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't believe that Israel had within it what it takes to redeem itself. But it's not going to be easy, and I think more and more people now are realizing how significant a moment we're in. Listing the protesters themselves, the economists, the security officials, the people in the diaspora, all of you who are here to hear about this. So I think Lihi, I would love it if you would share with our audience. It's not wrong to ask, is this really the huge threat to Israeli democracy that we're talking about? Or is this just some political squabble? I think there's a lot of people who are curious. They're just coming to awareness, perhaps, for the first time, that Israel has a little darker side than they had believed before. Like, is this overblown? What are you thinking, and what do you feel?
Great question. I think it's important to understand that we're not moving backwards. It's not that, we already had, what we used to have, a right-wing government, right? The 1 year of changed government, it's not like we're moving backwards. There is something that is completely new with this government. This is a very radical, extreme government. And I think that this is why it's so important to understand that we're facing something that that is not, we already know what to do with that. We need to readjust how we work with that. And as you said, it's enough to see the numbers of people going out to the streets and speaking up. The thing is, from what I see, and from what you see in Israel Hofsheet, I think the most, I don't know, like it's very sad, but also it's the happy thing at the same time. But you see people that up until now were sitting on the fence, are now joining the demonstrations, because everyone feels that this is a different moment. This is a moment where we can no longer sit on the fence, that sitting on the fence is as harmful as supporting this government, that this the discussion that we're having in Israel today is basically the history of the country. Like, this is the moment when we're writing down our history, and we got to a point where not so sure what is the right, what would be the next word. Okay, it's the soul of the country, the core of the country. What is the identity of the state of Israel? Is it more Jewish, or is it more a democracy? Is there a contradiction between the two? Why can it live together? Spoiler, I do think it can live together. But yeah, these are questions that, it's not something that a nation is facing on a daily basis. And I think the most important thing to understand that this is not a left or right issue. You would see on the demonstration people from all across the political spectrum with different views. Again, just because of that, because this is not regarding specific issues as much as it's an identity issue. You can even look at our work in Israel Hofsheet. Our work is primarily in the field of religion and state and freedom of religious in Israel. And you see all the civil society in Israel, just like a citizen himself, is linking up and working together, because we can no longer say, okay, so this is within our boundaries and this is not, and then decide what we're gonna do regarding to that or not. We all understand that now is a moment that we have to do something, because we're so close to the too late moment, and we don't want to get there.
Just for clarity, you were saying that civil society is linking up and saying this is my issue, that's your issue, meaning that religious freedom groups are also working on this democracy stuff because it affects, and then there's the women's groups that it affects because it's all this also affects the women's groups, and that affects the Palestinian citizens groups. I assume that's what you meant, just that you want to explain that just a little bit more?
I think that we understand that it all comes from the same place, that if we care about women's rights, and if we care about LGBTQ rights, we need to understand that all these rights and what this government is now referring as also as privileges, which is lovely, they did not come from legislation. These are all rights that came from the Supreme Court. These are all things that the government was trying to legislate in a different way. And then the Supreme Court said no. So for example, we're talking about the same Supreme Court that said, yeah, women can serve, sorry. Women can serve in office in public positions. Women can be part of the decision-making process. This is the same Supreme Court that said that gay couples can have kids. The same Supreme Court that said that as a business owner, saying I don't give service to women is discrimination. Like, these things have a name, and the Supreme Court gave it this name. And I think that now civil society understands that it all comes from the same place, that it's the same Supreme Court that allows all of us to know that, if we're looking, like, if there's a civil society and there's the system, right? So this is the part in the system that is on our side, that is looking at civil rights as the first priority, and not, how would I put it in a nice way? Politics? Political interests?
So I think we want to think about, so given that so many of the rights, so many of the advances that Israel has seen, not all of them rely exclusively on the Supreme Court. There has been some good legislation, but I think it's a fair point that since the 90s, a lot of that success in legislation ended, and since the 90s, a lot of the success in Israel's development as a liberal democracy has come through the Supreme Court. And that is why today we see that it is target number one of this particular alignment of this government. And there's a whole raft of proposals, of course, that are all aimed at, in short, taking out all the stop signs and speed bumps of a liberal democracy, taking out all of those protections of minorities and checks and balances within the government, such that a government elected is both the maker of the laws and the interpreter of the laws and the executor of the laws. And that is, maybe it's a technical democracy, it's not a liberal democracy, it's more a majoritarian democracy. And that is not what we envisioned, I think, when we say a light unto the nations. A majoritarian democracy, I don't think matches that description. So what do we do about this? What is possible in the short term and in the long term? we actually need to step back just a moment. I just want to take a show of hands real quick. I want to ask people, how closely are you following these issues? Raise your hand if you consider yourself following them very closely. Okay, that's almost all hands, but not all of them. How many of you would say that you're just following it a little bit or just have come to news recently? Actually, it's a fair amount. It's a fair amount. How many people would say that you are very worried about what you've read so far, about what you understand? Okay, that's a lot more. And how many people are not sure whether you're worried yet? Okay, nobody. It doesn't matter if you've been obsessively following it for the past few weeks or whether you're just coming to it. It sounds terrible. So I think that's helpful to Lihi and I as we try and share with you. So what can be done in this moment? I think what is really impressive, is the extent to which we've seen new civil society joining and all these actors like signing letters, all these sectors of the country which have taken action in ways that we've not seen them before. But I think at large, when we look at when New Israel Fund began seeing the early signs of populist illiberalism, the same sort of thing that led to Trump and led to Brexit, and because been shown under Erdogan and Bolsonaro and all these other places. Like, these are a lot of the same features. We saw them a decade ago in Israel already, and we began thinking about, okay, so what do we do in order to put up a bulwark in Israeli society against this emerging threat? And I think in this moment we've seen it's a very unfortunate "I told you so" moment. That we knew that this could happen, that it has happened. The major pieces of which seem to make sense in this moment, like what can we do? We see civil society's role in a couple ways, and this is where we're putting our money, and this is where we're putting our own organizing in the field. Half of NIF's work, to put it briefly, is funding grassroots organizations that are doing all kinds of good progressive things. The other half of what we do in Israel is actually to coordinate them, to organize them, to strengthen them, to do research that benefits them, all sorts of other pieces that ultimately aim to make the sum greater than the whole of its parts, the whole greater than the sum of its parts. So in this moment, what are we seeing that is possible? We're going to protect people's individual rights, especially vulnerable minorities. That's very clear, that has to happen. We also incredibly need to protect the right to dissent in this moment, as, let's just give an example. The Minister of Police, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's in charge of enforcing the rule of law, is encouraging the police to be brutal to protesters. But we cannot allow the government to dissuade people from exercising their freedom of protest. This is also an incredibly important moment to build the movement as we see people beginning to get off the fence. It is not enough that public opinion just says that this government's approval rating is in the toilet. If those people are not channeled, harnessed, connected, and plugged into a system by which their views and their involvement and their shekels and however it is will actually make a difference. So that is why the New Israel Fund has announced several $1 million, and we're funding several hundreds of dollars, or we're $100,000 in Canadian funded projects as well, into emergency projects that are coming out of the grassroots. Obviously, this is a huge amount of new work. Existing organizations are having to do so much more, and we'll explain that in a moment. And there's obviously all kinds of new initiatives coming out. And so our Emergency Fund for Democracy is a key piece of issuing rapid response grants to things live as they happen. But I think I want to get into that a little bit. So when we talk about Lihi, when we talk about protecting people's rights and protecting dissent and building the movement, when you are working as the deputy director of Israel Hofsheet, which is Israel's largest religious freedom organization, there's a lot of other wonderful and important religious freedom organizations like Iraq, Israel Religious Action Center, and others. But I think it's incredibly impressive that Israel Hofsheet didn't exist a decade ago, and now it has 160,000 activists. That I think is when you're sitting at the head of that institution and you're experiencing this moment, what do you do?
Take a deep breath. So the thing is, looking at the short term and the long term, we need to understand that every action that we take counts. It's a very slippery slope, and we cannot wait to act till something specific would happen. When they say they are planning to do something, they will do that. When they write in coalition agreement that they plan to allow discrimination, they mean to do that. And the thing is, we'll take for example Roe versus Wade, right? So no one would ever thought that once people think like this issue is already settled, like the Supreme Court already ruled on that issue, and then when Roe versus Wade got overruled, everybody were like, wait, what just happened? But the thing is, they say they're going to do it, and we were just, no, they won't. No, it would be fine. So as an organization, I think the first thing that we realized from that is that we should not and cannot let ourselves wait till something would get worse and worse. Like, we're already at the almost too late level. Looking at the coming year, I do think we have a lot of things that we can do in the immediate term. First, we have the municipal elections in October. And I think this is a very good opportunity for a pushback. Sort of like the midterms in the States, for that matter, because the municipalities in Israel do have power. They do have an incredible influence on the day-to-day life of Israeli citizens. For example, that public transportation that you see on Shabbat in Israel today, the only option is the option that municipalities are subsidizing. So the municipalities themselves are paying for that, and the government is not part of the subsidizing of that, because they decided that they care enough and they know that this is what their citizens want, so they would put the money on it, and they would find a way to do it. Another example you can take is, let's say you're registering your kid to school, right? And so at the end, you need to sign. Usually the forms used to say mother and father. And then municipalities said, wait, it's a new world. Like, we have such a variety of diverse kinds of families. Why not just write parent one, parent two? And so they did, and they changed the forms because they have the power to do so. And I think a lot of our work, we're working with the municipalities for the past 5 years, trying to strengthen liberal network of municipal leaders, so they know how to utilize this power from each municipality to look at that as a nation, as a whole country. So I think this is first. Another thing is definitely campaigns that we do like immediately. When I say immediately, I mean it like within hours. You can take an example. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Avi Maoz.
Avi Maoz, can you give me head nods if you heard the name?
I can help you. The racist, the homophobe, the chauvinist. I can help you with that.
I met and talked to her. She said, there's a particular minister in the new Israeli government who's like the homophobe. Yeah, that's that guy.
He's also the racist and the chauvinist, and great things to be known for. But he said, and that's a beautiful example. He said that the only contribution women in Israel can have to the country is to get married and have kids. Yep, take a moment to let it in. So within a couple of hours, we initiate a campaign saying that through our Life Cycle Ceremony Center, we will marry women couples for free. And then we had hundreds of couples signing up as part of this campaign. And the thing is, these are not couples that used to be engaged with our work previously. These are couples that did not see their wedding, this very private moment in their life, as a political event, as a political issue. And all of a sudden they understand that their life is under a threat. And so they find themselves, stepping up and saying, you will not take these rights from me, or you will not take us backwards. Another example that you see in campaigns, for example, there are 256 municipalities in Israel. And after another great thing by Avi Maoz, thank you, Avi. So he wanted to add all these, how should I put it, beautiful agendas, ideas, and concepts within the school system. So this would be a mandatory part of their curriculum. And so 170 mayors signed a letter saying that they will not let this content be part of their school system, that they will not let it happen. And so it's a huge number. This is a number that we didn't see before. And the thing is that many of them are associated with Likud, our Likud party originally, but they are mayors who are saying now, this is not who we are. This is not what we wish for our municipality. And we initiated a campaign just a few hours the letter was published, calling all the citizens that their mayors did not sign this letter to email them directly using our platform, email them directly saying, hey, Mr. Mayor, hey, Madam Mayor, I expect you to do so. If you want my vote on October 31st, this is what I want you to do now. This is what required for you in these times. And we thought, okay, we'll have a few dozen of people signing a few emails. And then we had hundreds of people from different municipalities that, again, these are people that were never engaged within our work in the past. These are people that, would consider themselves like, I love them, like they're not political. And now they understand that it comes to their very day-to-day private life. So I think that those campaigns, it's another good example. We're talking about why it's important to stop the judicial reform. I'm not gonna repeat that one. But yeah, Ben, I think you can continue from that.
I think those are really good examples, because what can you do when the government has an absolute majority to do what it wants, and you're trying to convince it to give up the authority to do what it wants? And I think what we're seeing at the moment is really encouraging. We're seeing so many people who aren't political, who haven't been involved so far, really coming off the fence. And I think that's crucial. And really, I don't know, it gives me hope. I hope it gives you hope as well. But then I hope we've heard a couple other things in here as well. To the greatest extent possible, what does it mean to protect someone's rights when the government has the absolute power to run roughshod over it if it might? Part of it is simply to throw up every possible roadblock so that it will take as long as possible for that ultimate infringement of their rights to get there. So whether it's the mayors saying we won't let you in, maybe it is or isn't even in their power to do so, but to say that this block is going to make it as extremely difficult as possible before any of that content would get into their children's classrooms. That's a reflection of what happens in other sectors as well, other places. So when we think about protecting the rights of the Palestinian minority in Israel, also one of the other major targets of this government's legislation and its acts. It's sort of, Jewish supremacist view of what is Israel supposed to be and who's it supposed to serve and who's supposed to have benefits and rights under it. The Palestinian citizens are not included in that at all, very expressly. And so we look at issues like, say, Palestinian protesters who are also would like to protest what's happening at the moment, but they are afraid of this police minister and his police. So what can we do? We need to do more of what we've already done, but to do it at a much higher level. The sort of monitoring and legal protection of people's individual rights. That if there's a protest or a gathering, a demonstration of Arab citizens, that there are people there monitoring with very clear jackets that say, we're watching this and we're, body cams sort of recording of what everything is going on. Documentation is the best evidence that something, that the police have acted beyond their authority or that they acted heavy-handedly. People following, people wrongfully detained, that there's a volunteer lawyers or lawyers on staff following their case and getting them out as quickly as possible. The opportunity for abuse of the system is much harder when there's a spotlight on every movement that you're doing. And that extends also into the territories in this moment of how do we protect the rights of Palestinian residents of the territories, as this government has in the past few days announced that it wants to build way more settlements and that it wants to demolish Palestinian villages or houses or homes in areas C of the West Bank, sort of, where Israel has more control. Again, if we shine an intense spotlight, if there are lawyers there, and frankly, if there's international presences there, it makes it very easy to get away with a lot of things. Throwing up barriers at every possible step and ensuring that there is a bright civil society spotlight. That also gives the political opposition the evidence, the ammunition that they need to say that something wrong is happening and we, the opposition, have an alternative suggestion. We look at the Bedouin villages in the south that this government intends to demolish and move a bunch of Bedouin from their villages into sort of reservation towns. Again, what is going to stop that? It's going to be the presence of not only Palestinian citizens themselves, who are there to shine a spotlight, but also the great presence of Jewish Israelis and other Israelis who are there to say, not in our name. That's one whole piece of this. But I do think we can actually proactively combat, and there are some very powerful new projects that I think are very interesting, that have only recently come out of the grassroots about combating hate and incitement. In this political moment when Israel's new political leaders are, openly saying from the Knesset floor that, once again, Arab citizens are animals and that we should talk to them like animals by making barnyard sounds at them. This is one of the coalition members from the furthest right, from Otzma Yehudit party. And going unchallenged, mind you, by his fellow coalition members. And even, let's be honest, not necessarily going well supported or challenged by the opposition either. This is an environment of incitement and hate that we've seen in the past goes very badly. People's lives and livelihoods are at stake. So what's an important piece of this, however, is that the incitement is not just, we know this from combating anti-Semitism in the diaspora, right? Like the people who say these things and who threaten Jewish safety, they organize online. They find themselves in Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups and they connect with each other and they proactively plan to go do mischief, to go be violent, to go, whether it's graffiti or whether it's actually assault someone or whether it's to go put themselves in great numbers in the presence of their targets. That is just threatening and intimidating. They do it online, and the same is true in Israel. So what's very powerful is to hear about like a group called Fake Reporter, which is a recent startup, and it's like a bunch of, you think of the tech wonders of Israel, like a bunch of the well-meaning tech wonders of Israel. They left Facebook and Google and whatnot, and they made themselves a social action organization where they monitor these groups, and they use like Facebook and WhatsApps and Instagrams and Twitter's own terms of reference to kick these people off social media or to get their groups closed down. And in some like really exceptional cases, they're monitoring the group, so they see they're organizing something right now, and they can alert the police right now that this group of people are saying these things in this group, and they're going to meet Tuesday, in Habima Square because they're looking for trouble and they're looking for somebody to beat up. And it's very humbling, I think, for those of us who give a few shekels into, whether it's to the New Israel Fund or other groups that are over there doing good work, to believe that we gave some shekels and that it went to a group like Fake Reporter, and that maybe on Tuesday night in Habima Square, we might have had a small piece of saving someone's life or livelihood.
Can I give an example talking about Fake
Please.
Reporter? Because we work with Fake Reporter, and recently we had an interesting work done with them. So there were a bunch of, literally a bunch of places, like all across the media that you were mentioning, of groups calling organizations like Israel Hofsheet, traitors, Nazis, calling to destroy us, calling to, we won't get into the lovely wishes they sent. But the thing is, we were collaborating with Fake Reporter, so they would help us find the specific individuals behind those fake accounts on Facebook, for example, so we can file a civil lawsuit against these people, so they would have to take in charge on their actions. Like, if the country is not, if the government is not going to do something about it, we as citizens have to. And so I worked with them, and it was all over the media after we did file the lawsuit with Fake Reporter. They're doing an amazing job. And I think it's also a great example to see how different organizations are now working together. So yeah, great example.
There's a few other pieces about building the movement. There's protecting people's rights and doing everything we can to forestall, even if the government really can move ahead with what it wants. But there's another piece about, we keep coming back to it, building the movement. That there's all kinds of new initiatives coming out of the grassroots, and what's very, I think, encouraging also is the kinds of things that Israelis are organizing that have never been seen before. And I want to give you an example of, like, just the protests themselves have never been this large and this sort of intersectional with this many different sectors coming together. Even in the cottage cheese protests of, say, like 2011, 2012, like, we didn't see this kind of full diversity of Israeli society. And we didn't see, like we see in opinion polls right now, that this government, like voters of this government, a significant portion of the voters who voted in this government, don't like what it's doing. That's a significant turnaround in public opinion, given we just went through 5 elections and nobody changed their opinion. So that's big. But can we understand better what's going on at that grassroots level? Can we understand better what those issues are? So one of the things that we are doing also in order to help the movement is just to fund opinion poll research, public opinion research, to understand what is animating all these different groups. Is there anything shared? Is there something large that we can give to civil society groups like Lihi at Israel Hofsheet that will help them do their work better? There's also the piece of this, like, are we going to, what about all these people who are coming out for the first time and they're talking about democracy, but they're not really talking about the occupation of the West Bank or the two-state solution or any of the other pieces. That is also, whatever happens over there, that is not presently democracy. And so this is an important moment where people are opening their eyes to the wider conversation. So one thing that is happening is that there are groups organizing, co-organizing these large protests, for whom they are raising the banner of occupation is also not democracy. And there is no way out of this that just goes back to square one. Like, we have to extend the quest for a better, more perfect Israel to that issue also. And so it's as simple as, parts of those groups in those massive protests bringing their posters and their flyers and doing their activism live in the protest at the moment, and not letting that voice fall out either. And there's another piece of this that one more quick example that I think is so lovely. We're in a house of worship at the moment, and I think many of you would be very comfortable to say that you are religious lefties in one way or another. But actually, I think there's something one of the most remarkable things that have happened in the past 3-4 weeks has been a group of people in Jerusalem decided that they were tired of being the religious lefty. Like, in their religious circles, they're weird because there she is. In their religious circles, they're weird because they're left, and in their lefty circles, they're weird because they're religious. And they felt like they were the only ones and that they were all isolated and that no one else was like them. And so they decided to hold a little conference because this situation just gotten too bad. So they announced this conference, and they expected a couple 100 people to come out, and 1,000 people came to this first inaugural conference. And it had Haredi, Orthodox, like Haredi meaning ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, Reform, Masorti, conservative, you name it, people were there, and they knew each other, but they never knew that they were secretly also harboring the same desires for women's rights and ending the occupation and all these other things, which are so hard to talk about in their home communities. Again, it's just some further transformation. You wouldn't have thought that it didn't exist in Israel, but it does, and now they're getting mobilized. So I think, what do we do about the long term? Like, I think we just talked about a bunch of stuff we can do in the short term. We can show dissent, we can protect dissent, we can protect people's lives and livelihoods in very concrete ways. But really, like, we have to be honest, this is gonna take the elections, we went through 5 elections that were deadlocked. There's a deeply conservative part of Israel and a deeply liberal part of Israel. This will take us 10, 20, 30 years to turn this around. This is not about just one politician. It's not just about one political party. It's not just about one election or even 5 elections. We saw the early evidence of this coming a decade ago. So we want to build the movement not just for this moment, but also for the next election or for the next elections that will come. These issues aren't going away. And we wouldn't be satisfied either with just to go backwards to the last government or to go backwards to 2 governments ago. Israel was already an imperfect democracy before, and we would not be content unless we were making deep investments, helping Israelis ultimately make their country a light unto the nations. So there's a couple pieces that we see are just naturally part of that. How are we going to turn this around? What's the long term? Obviously, a major component of the last government was Jewish-Arab political partnership. I think it's actually a hopeful note that a year ago, or more than a year ago, before that government formed, everybody was thinking that Arabs in government, like an Arab-Israeli political party, as a member of the coalition, might take us another decade. If anything, we saw that there was a proof of concept that an alternative is possible. And in these last elections, after that government fell apart, the last elections, people were voting, obviously on primarily Bibi or security or corruption or whatever. They weren't voting on the issues of democracy at large, I think we can say. But they were voting for the alternative, and there was no viability for that alternative. Everybody was implicitly voting for more Jewish-Arab political partnership. Because there's no way out of that. There's no way to make another government unless you bring Arab partnership back. If you look at the past 5 elections, first it began, 5 elections ago, support for Arab political partnership was somewhere around 30%. And then the next election, it went up a little higher. And the next election, it crossed 40%. And then by the time we had the 5th election, the last election, it had crossed 50%. That is huge, and that's not in the headlines. Something significant is happening within Israeli public opinion, and we need to, the current government sees that as its massive threat, its greatest threat to holding its coalition together is whether it can keep the Jews and Arabs on the other side of the political spectrum apart. So our job, greatly in this moment, rooted in the short term, but ultimately for the long term, is we have to protect that partnership. We have to show that even if it's difficult, even if it costs us political capital, even if it's not easy in this moment, we have to show that there are Jews who believe that Arabs can sit in government with us, and that we can share governance of this country. And some of the interesting work that happens there is for the past decade and for the foreseeable few decades, the New Israel Fund has been very proud to partner with organizations that are creating leadership cohorts of young leaders, like people, I get to say I'm 40, I'm not so young anymore, but people who will be politicians in, say, a decade or 2 decades. That actually means somebody close to my age, who maybe in the future will decide to run for Knesset. That investment now matters We saw that last government fall apart, partly because they didn't understand how to exchange the coinage of keeping their coalition together. What do you give and what do you give up within the partners in order to keep yourselves in power? That begins with people from a broad swath of Israelis from a broad swath of Israeli society sitting together, talking together, and it cannot leave out Arab citizen participants. Otherwise, you will not be able to make that alternative vision stick. We are doing at the moment that I think are show again. Yes, New Israel Fund is funding these things, but I think the important note is that they are coming out of the grassroots on their own, and they're looking for support and they're looking for a partnership. So there are a great deal of new ideas that the Progressive Camp needs, and there's new leaders that the Progressive Camp needs, and that there's new institutions that the Progressive Camp needs. Israel Hofsheet didn't exist 10 years ago, that 160,000 activists across the country are ready to fight battles here or there around at the municipal level and at the national level about religious freedom. That didn't happen before. So we have think tanks like Molad, or Zulat, founded by Zahava Galon, or Mitvim. These are the groups that do the heavy thinking that ministers of Knesset rely on for the research and the policy proposals, and that the right wing has done very successfully. I would love to see a show of hands. Who's heard of recently of the Kohelet Forum? Yeah, it's interesting. It's gotten a lot of media attention. It's the right-wing think tank that wrote all the legislation that they're advancing at the moment about the court. Has been working very quietly and actively for a decade, and these are important for the progressive camp, and not just the left. This isn't the progressive, meaning just the left. We're talking also about the pro-democracy camp at large. Has to do the same things, has to provide alternatives, has to do the research, the heavy lifting. Just a few, I want to make sure that Lihi, you get a chance to say, there's, when you're working on the long term, what does that mean specifically for an issue like religious freedom?
I think generally speaking, when we're looking at long term, it's sort of like a plan that you need to set yourself the milestones. So if we want to see our country in a certain place within 10 years, we need to decide where we want to be in 7, 5, 3 years, and then working towards that. If we'll take, for example, civil marriage, right, which is something that we're working on to promote in Israel, because right now the only option that we have is through the Rabbanut. So we do understand that we will not have legislation, especially not with this government. But it doesn't mean that we need to sit back and say, okay, we can give up on civil marriage. So we are working for over a decade within Havaya. This is our Israeli life cycle ceremonies, where we both do the ceremonial part for couples, that we build with them their ceremony. We have more than 60 officiators, men and women from all across the, let's call it Jewish spectrum, different kind of, from different backgrounds, different fields. And so a couple can choose how to best represent their Jewish identity within their ceremony. The other thing that we do with them is help them with legal services to set their status as a common law marriage. That is something that is not equal, but it's a part of the way. This is one of the milestones that we want to see looking towards civil marriage. And you can see, for example, let me show you that. See this one? This is a ID card that we have. This is mine. This is an ID card that we have initiated in Havaya for almost a decade ago. And, if you would tell me a decade ago that this ID card would be recognized by the Ministry of Housing, that when they see that, they recognize the couple and they would give them equal rights as a married couple, I would tell you, Ben, you're too optimistic. But there he is looking at the short term. This is happening today. And 10 years ago, we didn't believe it could happen. We didn't believe a big part of our work in the past year is working with the private sector. Okay, so they would accept these ID cards for their employees when it comes to benefits like health insurance, or every workplace that has its benefits for its employees. And we have more and more companies joining us saying yes, and any employee that would show us this card would get equal rights as a married employee, even though within their ID, right, the state ID, it says that they're still single because the country does not recognize it as marriage. And we see more and more companies joining us. And the thing is that it comes to a point where the country would have to recognize it because it already has all these companies recognizing it, right? It has different ministries separately recognizing it for specific matters. And then it would be all over the place. They would have to accept it. And looking at the long term, it is something that we couldn't imagine. I think another thing, looking at the long term, and you were talking a little bit about it, is about the leadership. I think that strengthening local initiatives and local groups, and honestly, I wanted to say young leadership, but as a 30-year-old, I cannot say that. But looking at one of the programs that we have is we train political advisors, and we help them afterwards to get a job within the political system. Now, the thing is, between us, the whole goal of that is not that they would get a job right after they're done with the training. These kids would be Knesset members in 20 years. These kids would be responsible for the future of our country within 10 and 20 years. And these are seeds that we have to plant now if we want to see this beautiful flower blossom in 20 years. This is a base and an infrastructure that we have to create now.
Lihi, I think we should let's move to questions so that we can spend some time doing that. Are you okay? I know this isn't the way that you anticipated doing this program tonight, but our programs in Ottawa and Montreal were
None of us did, so thank you.
Yeah. Before we take questions from you all, I want to point out one thing. What's happening in Israel, where there's all these unusual actors getting off the fence, is also happening here in the diaspora. That there's all these unusual organizations who normally, organizations or individuals who normally dissuade people from criticizing Israel publicly, are suddenly made a 180 and they're encouraging everybody to criticize Israel publicly. It's a very strange moment to be in. And it's well justified. But I think what is happening also is we're seeing an exact, what we're trying to do in Israel, we have to do here as well. That just the mere existence of unpopular opinion does not immediately channel itself into making a difference. Especially if everyone just sits at home or talks about it amongst themselves and doesn't take action. And so that's why on your seats today, there is a take action card. I have not encountered a moment in the 15 years of my doing this where I have seen so many people asking questions about what is going on and how do we get here and what is the future and is there anything I can do about it? And the answer is yes, there are things you can do about it. It would be easy for me to say, well, give a shekel to the New Israel Fund because that's what we do. But actually, that's not what I'm going to ask you to do, because I think there's something even more important that you all can do, which is we need to be helping raise the conversation here in the diaspora. We need to be connecting people who are worried and are concerned with something to do. Preeminent and more important than all of the rest of it, I think here, that's one of our most important charges at the moment. And you hear Lihi saying, well, Lihi, what do you say? Is it even okay to be active as a diaspora person in Israel's internal affairs? Aren't we like interfering in Israeli democracy?
I use my Israeli chutzpah here. It's not just okay. I think it's crucial. I think it's necessary. I think this is a responsibility and an obligation. If you care about if you care about Israel as a Jewish democracy, if you care about its future, if you care about its identity, if you care about how your kids would feel about Israel, how would they find themselves looking at Israel as the home of the Jewish people? So yeah, I think you must be involved now. I think this is, from a personal note, and I wouldn't be here today if I wouldn't think that you have such a crucial part in that. Like, you're part of the family. you have to be a part of it.
So there's a top suggestion, which is it would be very nice if you joined those Israelis who were the Conference of Israeli Lefties, of religious lefties, and if you signed the petition yourself. But I would actually much prefer it if you send it to 3 friends, even if it just gets the conversation started. And if you've already done that, then I would say, have you talked to your MP? I think there's a great stereotype of what Canadian Jews believe on Israel, and they're probably wrong to begin with, but they're probably, them being our elected political leaders, probably are not as aware or tuned in of the great overwhelming concern in the Jewish community at the moment about what's happening. And there are other things that you can do on the website under the nifcan.org/take action as well. And we'll be having continual little things that you can do in order to keep raising the issue within our institutions. For example, one of the most lovely things you can do is just to send an email to Rabbi Ed and say, hey, thanks. This is a really brave conversation to have here, and we really appreciate it. Sometimes those little things also make all the difference. So with that, I would like to open things up and take some questions. I want to take a bunch of questions all at once, probably 5 or 6. So Lihi, I will do a good job of repeating them back to you. And because I have to repeat them back to Lihi, if they're sentence-long questions, that's ideal. If they're paragraph or page-long commentary, I'm going to have to sum them up for her. So I saw you first here in the orange and black sweater. I saw 1, 2, 3. Sort of how do we prevent escalation? So it was there was a lot of concern, Lihi, about the violence we saw in the West Bank within the past 24 hours, and how do we prevent escalation, I think is what I'm going to sum that up. Tied to everything else that's going on too. So there were some protests, some supportive protests in Toronto, and there's some disappointment that they're small, and what can we do to make them bigger? There was some commentary about Erwin Kotler and what he said, and could he do something more to help break through to reach other people, because this message is still not reaching a lot of people.
What should their role be in fostering the discussion, both, I guess, the religious and the lay leadership?
Great question. Have the larger Jewish organizations in Canada said anything about all of this? Okay, so there was quite a bit there. Lihi, was there any question in there that you wanted to, or any piece of that you wanted to comment on?
I think that I would love to talk just the last few questions. You were talking about the community leaders, and I think that you have a lot of responsibility in how it would look like, what your community leaders would do, because if you would put pressure on your community leaders to speak up, to be vocal and advocate for democracy in Israel these days, because we see, I think it's the act of speaking up, and that we see more and more people speaking up that did not do that before, that is sort of shaking out the boat and making the leadership in Israel understand that, okay, this is a very thin ice we're walking on. Like, we need to be very, very careful with what we're doing. Like, people are looking at us and nothing go unseen. And I think in these terms, you can definitely, and you definitely should, put pressure on your community leaders as well as your elected officials, make them speak up make them be your voices, as well as yourselves. Use the social media. We live in a world that you have a huge power to advocate by yourself. So to use that power, and I think that it would and it brings me to the other question as well. Like, I think it's sort of a big it's like a domino, right? It would all come together eventually, because if you are talking to more and more of your friends and telling them what is going on, how important it is that they would speak up, and they speak up, and they talk with their community leaders as well, and then many people are joining the demonstrations in Toronto, and then you have more and more elected officials speaking up and being vocal about it. I think we need to start, moving this chain. So yeah, that's my take on that. I think it's very important. These are great questions.
Yeah, I want to sum up. There was a couple, sort of two realms of the questions. One is like what's happening in Israel at the moment, especially with incitement and those pieces. And there was another section, a couple questions all about sort of like making a difference here, and what can we do to move the community. Look, this is what we're here to do tonight. We're having this event, and we're doing this in 4 of Canada's major cities in order to say, hey, we need to do something, and it needs to be concrete. There are leaders in our community that need to hear from us, and if you have done one, why not do a second? If you've done a second, why not do a third? I have had conversations, the leadership of the New Israel Fund and the other progressive groups. Lee Weiser's here from Ours in Canada, a very close partner of ours that we're very proud to work with. And then there's also like Amenu and Canadian Friends of Peace Now. We do work together, and we are raising a collective voice. I think our microphone is rather small, not because the liberal slice of the community is small, but because we've chosen to self-silence over many decades. We've chosen to believe that there aren't that many of us, which is false. We've chosen to say that we're not that influential, which is also false. And we've allowed ourselves to believe that those other institutions won't listen to us, which is totally not true. Just a small piece of a curious note is CJA did a webinar a couple weeks ago, where they had a couple people talk about a couple Israelis talk about the judicial issue. It was very interesting to me that they titled the slogan for the program was unity, not conformity, or uniformity. I thought that was rather telling. They've actually opened room under the umbrella of unity for a little bit more debate. I think an institution like that doesn't do that lightly. And I know for a fact, having had conversations with many Jewish institutions and many Jewish leaders, and that many of you are involved in those institutions and share with me what they say and what they think. They're looking for the grassroots to lead. They're like, we'll do what our constituents want us to do, but we won't do anything if they don't want us to do it. And I think that's why we're asking you to take action. I think rabbis are scared of their congregants. Congregants are scared of their rabbis. I think major Jewish institutions that do well-meaning fundraising for this, that, and the other are scared of talking about Israel because it'll cost them some support. I just happen to think this is not one of those moments where we can let the fear of dissent or the fear of standing up stop us from doing something that's really important. That if we look back at some of those other moments in Israel diaspora relations, whether it was the Russian refuseniks or whether it was the Ethiopian Aliyah, or whether it was the debates over defining who is a Jew in the 90s, there were significant moments in Jewish, in global Jewry, where the diaspora mobilized and had to mobilize, and often it did so at the disagreement of the Israeli government. And as just the stuff with Women of the Wall and the Kotel Plaza is just one of those examples. This is another one of those moments, and it's a bigger moment than before. I'm I am 40, but I do hear stories of what it was like in those other issues long ago, how everybody responded. Is this my story now that I will tell my 5-year-old and 2-year-old? Sorry, I'm getting all choked up about it. That our community did respond, or our community didn't respond, and that we let it happen, or that we put up a fight and that we're helping turn it around. That is sort of the moment we're in. So I would say, like, the institutions will go where their members take them. And so that's why you need to act. And I think Israelis also need your support, and there's ways of supporting them, but there's things that we can and do here. I think lastly, to the question of Erwin Kotler, he had a whole interview published in Times of Israel that I think was very compelling. Thousands of words of quotes that's worth sharing around Times of Israel. Yeah, opposing the judicial override and explaining his views on it. So I think we need to. I would like to move this conversation downstairs to where there's cookies and coffee, and we'll get to continue discussing. If I didn't answer your question fully, then I would like to answer your question fully. So I just want to say, Lihi, I'm sorry you don't get to benefit from coffee and cookies downstairs.
Are you not a Lutheran?
But I wanna invite Mark Finkelstein back up to just close this out.
So Ben and Lihi, I just want to thank you for speaking with us today. What you've said is very motivating, and it's important for us to see your love of Israel. You managed to share the reality, but managed to keep us hopeful for the future. But now I've got to do a little bit of an advertisement. Okay, you've got to just wait for this advertisement. It's very important. If learning about this view of Israel inspired you today, then I suggest you join Ben and Lihi and a lot of other people on our tour, study tour on May 8th to the 15th.
And you.
And me. Well, I'll get to that. That's important. So you spend 8 days immersed in the most difficult issues of Israeli society whilst learning from dozens of Israeli activists, just like Lihi and Ben, in places where they do their work. Learn more about infrastructure and recognize Bedouin villages, learn about the struggle for religious freedom from secular and Orthodox feminists, learn about the quest to end occupation from both Jewish and Palestinian human rights defenders in the West Bank. You can just imagine an entire week spent understanding the people in Israel who are building and growing a movement to protect and advance democracy and equality for all those who live there. I believe that on March the 1st registration closes, so I suggest you think about this, speak to Ben, speak to the New Israel Fund people. But from a personal point of view, my wife Madeline and I have decided that we're going to go on this very important study tour. Please join us. I'm sure it will be informative and interesting, and I promise, I'll make this formal promise now, we won't go short of good scotch. That's an important thing. Thank you to the Narayever for hosting us today, and to our co-sponsors, the Canadian Friends of Peace Now and Ameno Canada. As Ben mentioned, we're going to have light refreshments downstairs, and if you've got any questions, further questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.